Hi everyone, and welcome to the Purple Mountain Live. We're a little bit later than scheduled today, but all things happen for a reason. We have these obstacles, but I'm sure it's going to be well worth the wait. We are joined by David Icke once again, so please you could join us, David, and give us this time because I know you keep him very busy and doing as much work as you can.
Yeah,
Uh,
well, the reason we're a bit delayed is because I do an interview somewhere in the world virtually every weekday at 5 o'clock UK time. And I knew I had an interview today, and just the head goes, well, okay, that's 5 o'clock. So it wasn't, it was 2 o'clock. So that's the delay. It's me. But anyway, we're here now.
we're here and we're going in.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant.
And the last time we spoke to you, David, it was actually on November the 5th. And that is such really a short time ago, but so much has happened since. And a lot that we spoke about in the last videos. And I know you've been putting a lot of content out weekly and daily yourself and doing a lot of research. But the thing that I'm becoming more aware of at the moment is this tremendous guilt narratives that's being put on people of already trying to place in people's minds that they're doing something wrong when they're not. And I just wanted to come to you first of all and so your thoughts on where we're up to now in this situation.
Right. Okay. Well, I'll see you in about an hour then. Because,
Yeah.
but you picked up on a very important part of the story. You can't understand what's happening unless you realize it is a psychological war on the human mind. And the relationship between government and law enforcement and the public is one of, you could call it domestic abuse. If you look at the psychology of psychopaths, because these people are psychopaths, involved in forms of abuse, whether it's child abuse or whether it's domestic abuse or any kind of abuse, the dynamic is of the psychopath dominating the person being abused, but the abused taking on the guilt that it's somehow their fault.
Yes.
So again and again, way back when I was working for the BBC, I did a film on what were then called battered wives hostels. They wouldn't be called that now, but that's what they were called then. This would be back in the 1970s, late 1970s. And there was a lady called Erin Pitsey, who was the wife of a well-known television journalist who fronted up this exposure of how domestic abuse is not something that should be just, pushed under the carpet. It was real and it needed to be addressed. Anyway, because of that, I ended up doing a film at one of these hostels. And among the things that I saw was the amount of guilt that the abused had for what happened to them. Mm-hmm. And you get this this guilt imposition, manipulation on children. I mean, I've done enormous amounts of research on child abuse, sexual child abuse, violent child abuse. And again, you have this same dynamic of the abuser making the abused feel guilty. And one of the interesting things from my point of view about current events is that, again, from about 1996 in America and other countries, but it started out in America and then across into Britain, to 1996 to 2003, 4. I did a tremendous amount of research again into mind control, and of course all this abuse and it's your fault when I'm doing it is all part of mind and perceptual control. And I talked to a long stream of people who'd been held captive in the infamous MK Ultra mind control operation in America, which came to light in the 70s and then was massively covered up. I mean, only a fraction of what happened ever came out. And what I'm seeing now, when I look at the populations worldwide, and I look at what governments are saying and how people are being treated and what they're being told to do and not do, it's straight out of the playbook of MK Ultra. It's a collective version of that, and it's about dismantling the human psyche, dismantling human self-respect, because once self-respect is gone, then only submission remains. And the stuff with the masks, where the holes are far bigger than viral particles anyway, and if you believe there's virus, I certainly don't. I believe it less every day. But the whole idea that these masks are about health is ridiculous. In fact, they're about destroying health through breathing in your own carbon dioxide and not enough oxygen for your brain and your body, and having these toxin-filled masks on your face all day. We had you probably saw it, there was a very good video circulating in the last week or so, which we have on davidicke.com, which was a doctor with a passionate plea for people to take their masks off, because he said they're killing you. And he told the story of how, and the reason he was so passionate in making this video, he'd heard overnight that a 4-year-old patient of his had been rushed to hospital with serious respiratory problems, 4 years old, and almost died. And even the people at the hospital diagnosed the fact that it was caused by an infection in the lungs from wearing a mask and all that toxins gathering and then being taken in the lungs. So it's nothing to do with health. It's actually about destroying health, because respiratory problems always got COVID-19. And we're going to see more and more of this as the respiratory consequences of long-term mask wearing go on, and they want to increase it, where you're wearing them more and more and more. Some idiots now are talking about you need to wear 2 masks. Well, I'll tell you where you can stick them, and the sun ain't shining there. but the point being that we're looking at this, it's a psychological operation, which is why the point you raise is so important. And so you have, of course you do, the policy in Britain, around the world, but certainly it can be identified in Britain, is being driven by psychologists from the government's behavioral insights team. There's another operation which connects into that called SPY-B. These are psychologist-led bodies, so-called advising the government on the policy. And so you have this dynamic between government and population now, which is of an abuser and an abused population. And so what you're seeing, because the abuser has to get acquiescence and has to get servitude from the person they're abusing, and they do that by getting the abused person in fear of them. And so now you're seeing more and more brutality from what I call the yellow shirts, the police, being seen more and more obviously. It is literally a dynamic of abuser and abused. And so you get beat up in the street by these yellow shirts, brown shirts, black shirts, yellow shirts, and it's your fault. It's your fault. You shouldn't have left your home. It's your fault. And by the way, what we're doing is we're using this RT-PCR test, which the creator, Kerry Mullis, said cannot be used to diagnose infectious disease. And we're going to use it to diagnose infectious disease. And what that's going to do is give us, I say 100% false positives, but even those that believe in it say the false positives are colossal. Anyone with a brain, that is, that believes in it. And so we're going to create all these fake cases, overwhelming majority of which have no symptoms of anything. And we're going to tell you, as we manipulate the tests by using amplification of the genetic material used in the test by phenomenal amounts, to the point where, you know, a stone would test positive with this test, because the amplification is so great. The more you amplify it, the more positives you get, fake positives. And so as we manipulate the figures and the cases to go up and up, fake cases, we're going to tell you it's your fault. And then what we're going to do is if you die of anything after a fake positive test with a test not testing for the virus, within 28 days and even longer, up to 60 days.
Yeah.
And if you die of anything in that period after a test that's not testing for the virus, we're going to say you died of the virus, and that's going to push up the death figures. And we're going to say you're responsible. And just to finish on this point, we had a story on davidicke.com the other day. It was out of America. And it was literally, it had children apologizing and grandchildren apologizing to their elderly relatives for giving them COVID-19. And of course, the guilt of that they'll carry for the rest of their lives. So you cannot do this unless you're a frickin' psychopath. And by understanding that's what these people are, there's the super psychopaths, and then there's the idiot psychopaths like Matt Hancock and Boris Johnson. And the dynamic is abuse and abuser, and and a psychological dismantling of the human psyche, so we become subservient to anything we're told to do. Going on.
I think a big thing there is what I'd just like to interject there is, I think there's a huge war. I call it a war. It's a war against consciousness. Yeah, that's what I feel is this big war. And I think what I'm seeing more and more, which it is quite frightening to really see, is you can't have a different opinion. You know, we live in a society where people will just believe anything and they don't question things. And me and Chris try to do this all the time in our videos, encourage people to question what they're reading, do your own research. But people are, I will call it, become so ignorant, your word, passive, submissive, that they don't even question anything now. They'll just believe this narrative. And I think that's so dangerous, that people just believe this illusion, these lies. But if you dare to question it, you're an enemy of the state. You're an enemy. It's your fault why all this virus is spreading. It's rubbish.
Exactly. So I must be in bloody trouble, then, mustn't I? But enough, I somehow survived. What you've described is a very interesting point, because if we go back to mind control and things like MK Ultra, when people are in a mind controlled state, it really doesn't matter, and they'll tell you that. You know, those that have been deprogrammed from it, or in the process of being deprogrammed from it. Again, there's a wonderful kind of parallel to this, and that's when you look at what happens to people in cults.
Yeah.
That's a cult situation, and that's what we have. We have a COVID cult. Is a situation of mind control, perception control. Now, if you talk to someone who's in a cult, or you talk to someone who's under mind control, you can put in front of them as much evidence as you like, absolutely unquestionable evidence that they're under mind control and they're in a cult. But they'll never get it, because their programming, think of a computer that's been firewalled not to process certain information. Like the Chinese computer system doesn't read great chunks of the internet. So you can put anything in front of them, no matter how compelling, but they won't get it because they can't process it, because they're programmed stops them processing it. So in these mind control programs, part of the programming is programming the mind, the brain, not to process any information that exposes the programming.
Yeah.
Because otherwise, you know, a lot more people would see they were programmed and break out of it. They don't want that. And again, the dynamic is exactly the same. So if you look at especially the longer this hoax has gone on, people are downloading a perception of reality that is becoming more and more solidified in their mind, so that they literally, like the people in the cult and the people in the mind control program, they literally can't process any longer information that would expose that their perceptual program is actually what it is, and based on lies. And the other aspect of this, which closes people off from information, is that it's very, very hard for people, many people, to face the simple truth.
Yeah.
That this world is controlled and directed by a psychopathic level of evil that is almost incomprehensible to people who aren't in that mode. And so, you know, the easiest thing to do is tell people what they want to hear. The hard thing to do is tell people what they don't want to hear. Because when
absolutely,
the door's already open. When they don't want to hear it, their door's already closed. So they don't want to hear the truth of what we're looking at and how this has been planned for a very long time. I do understand that. Why would you want to acknowledge that the world is run by people so bloody evil that they are quite happy to destroy the lives and the futures of billions of people and manipulate them to have a fake vaccine, because it's not a vaccine, it doesn't meet any criteria of the definition of a vaccine, to fill them with synthetic genetic manipulating, DNA manipulating shite to start the process of transforming their bodies from a biological to a synthetic biological state. Now, who the hell wants to face that? That people would create lockdown for no other reason than to destroy the independent livelihoods of the population globally, so they become dependent on the few.
Yes.
Just survive. Who wants to face that? Well, people who care about the truth and want to do something about it want to face that. They want to know that. But vast chunks of the population, they don't want to know that because they'd rather it not be true. So anyone comes along, you see, and tells them, actually, it's not true. These people are all conspiracy theorists. They're tinfoil hat people. They're natters. Oh, no.
Yeah.
Oh, that's the open door. Oh, really? Thank goodness for that.
Yeah.
So instead of listening to that and looking at the information, I'll listen to a prat like Mac Hancock and his mate Johnson, just script readers for the dark suits in the background. And I'll believe them, even though they've been provably lying to us for almost a year incessantly. So again, it's all about psychology, and the whole basis of it is psychology. People go under house arrest meekly because of two reasons. One, psychologically, they believe that what they're being told about a deadly virus is true. And two, they think there's something not right here, but they're frightened of standing up against authority and what it's telling them to do. And those two states of the mind are the reasons we are where we are.
Absolutely. It's it seems to me, I think you hit the nail on the head there, David, a lot when if you're to speak up against what's going on at the minute, the attacks are getting very swift. I'm finding that. And what you get hit with is, well, prove it. And I was having a conversation the other week with somebody, and I said, well, prove to me what you're saying is right. Why is it only those who speak up against things that we have to have proof, whereas I'm being told things every day and I'm not getting any proof that it's actually happening? And to me, we get called insane, but at this moment in time, I think that is the most sanest thing you can do, is lose your mind in this world and go back to your true consciousness. That's that, because I feel like, Stephen, it is a war on our consciousness.
Yeah, it's a war on consciousness, and consciousness is perception. Your consciousness dictates your perception. So if you're coming from an expanded state of consciousness, you will see a situation in a certain way. And if you're coming from a much more limited state of consciousness, doesn't mean you're inferior. It means you're making the decision actually to only be conscious to a level that is way below your potential to be conscious. Yeah. What I call the five sense mind. Well, this whole manipulation by this global cult is to hold people in a state of five sense perception, five sense what bravely called consciousness. Therefore, can I see it, touch it, taste it? Oh, okay, it exists then. If I can't, then it doesn't. And if the government authority says so, then it must be true. And if someone's challenging that, well, prove it then. Well, why don't you let the government prove it? Well, the government doesn't prove it. It's the government. This is the way it works. But the irony is that it is provable. Provable. For instance, that the PCR test, which is producing all the cases, does not test for a virus that is infectious to humans. It doesn't. It is provable fact that the vaccine is not a vaccine. The official definition of a vaccine is something that affects the immune system in a way that protects the body against a particular disease. That's the definition of a vaccine. Not even the manufacturers of these COVID fake vaccines claim that it stops transmission or stops you getting it. The only thing they say, well, it might make the worst of the symptoms better. But even when you break down its no testing background, it doesn't even prove that that's true. And you've got companies making the vaccines who have nothing to lose and everything to gain because they have immunity from prosecution for all the effects of their vaccines, which are now becoming more and more obvious the more it's rolled out. And you have makers of the vaccines that have conducted the bloody tests. So, absolutely. I mean, how much proof do you need that there's a scam here?
Yeah.
And everywhere you look, name one risk assessment on the effects psychologically and in terms of health of long-term mask wearing. One risk assessment that's been done by any government, any police force, any supermarket that's now pushing this stuff on their customers. Not one has been done. But 50, 60 or more independent scientific studies have been done to show, A, that masks don't protect you from viruses, and B, the potential health and psychological damage of long-term mask wearing is phenomenal. So, but we're back. If you don't want to face reality, because you haven't got the courage and the backbone to face reality, even though your kids are going to face a nightmare because of that reality, then you're not going to listen to anyone who's communicating information to point out that the reality you don't want to face is actually the reality. So you'll say to someone who's telling you what you don't want to hear, prove it to me.
Yeah.
You won't say that to someone who's telling you what you do want to hear. And really, it is like walking around a kindergarten. And I say that with the greatest of respect to children. It's like walking around a kindergarten. And we're seeing a real parting of the ways here. Unfortunately, between those who have decided that, yes, I will actually have a mind of my own, and I will celebrate that fact. and those that say, if I have a mind of my own, I've got to face a reality I don't want to face. So I'm just going to crack on as if all those people that have a mind of their own are nutters, and I'm going to believe whatever the government tells me. And, you know, what level of compliance, what level of servitude does it take to, and this will be happening to a lot of people around the world, to sit at home under house arrest, with your family under house arrest, knowing that the policies that are being imposed upon you, or you're acquiescing meekly to, are destroying your livelihood. If you've got a business, you're destroying your business. Or employment with those businesses, destroying your employment. And yet you're defending the abuser. Now, how many times have I heard, with that film I mentioned earlier and other situations through my life, abused people saying, say a partner, a male partner is abusing a woman. The number of times I've heard a woman say, well, you know, he's all right, really, you know, just has his moments. Yeah, and in those moments, he knocks the living crap out of you. Oh, yeah, but you don't, it's not always like that. It's only when he's had a drink, you know. And it's like the same thing. You're having these abused people defending the abuser. And what it is there's a name for it. It's called Stockholm Syndrome. Stockholm Syndrome is when you are, say, taken hostage by terrorists or something, and you end up defending, even promoting, even falling in love with the terrorists that have taken you hostage. And I see Stockholm Syndrome everywhere. And those of us that don't fall for it, well, we've got a responsibility, and that is to keep talking and keep pressing forward and doing everything we can to challenge this narrative. And the narrative is so ludicrous, it's so unsupportable by evidence, that's where all the mass hysterical censorship comes from. They can't defend their narrative, their claims, with open debate, because the whole thing, the house of cards will come down in 5 minutes. So what they do is they simply silence that debate, so it can't happen, and people only hear what the authorities decide that they can hear. And when you reach a point where the president of the United States just left, Trump, I'm no Trump supporter, my God, no, and Biden, don't start me, but when you as Twitter and so on can actually silence the president of the United States because it doesn't fulfill your community guidelines. And I found a great definition of the community guidelines of Facebook and YouTube and Twitter, and which I was writing earlier today. If the cult wants it, it stays up. If the cult doesn't want it, it gets deleted. That they are literally, when you break it down, they are the community guidelines of these internet platforms. So if you're saying something that supports the narrative and it's something that this cult wants circulating, it doesn't matter if it's abusive, doesn't matter if it's threatening someone's life, doesn't matter if you're passing on child pornographic material, stays up. But because there's a lawsuit I was seeing on the website today running, where one of these platforms is being taken to court for allowing child pornography to circulate and saying that they can't take it down because it doesn't break their guidelines. What? But this is what I mean. If the cult wants it, then it doesn't matter how abusive it is or anything, it doesn't get censored. But if the cult doesn't want it, which owns these platforms, of course, then it comes down, even though it's just mild, provable information. This is the whole criteria.
that censorship seems to be coming more swiftly and swiftly as the weeks have passed, David, with so many people being taken down and platforms and most notably Parler as well, that was very swiftly dismantled.
Well, that's an interesting point, you see, because when people like me were banned by all these platforms, it was almost a war medal. I mean, if they want to silence you, you must be saying something right.
Exactly.
But what people say is, well, they've every right to do that because they're private companies, and so they can decide who goes on and who doesn't. Oh, well, okay, let's follow that through. So, what do they say to you? You want to go and start your own platform if you're bothered.
Exactly.
So then Parler does, and they take it down. And who takes it down? Amazon, Google, etc. Apple, and this is ever daily confirmation of how this cult works.
Yeah, I believe they also lost their legal team as well.
Yeah, everybody.
People were dropping off around them.
So you've got this global web, and all these different apparently unconnected organizations like Apple and Microsoft and Amazon and Google and YouTube, though Amazon or YouTube is owned by Google. They're not unconnected. They are all attached to this web. And through this web, that's why they move as one unit. That's why they moved as one unit against Parler. Yeah. And what you've got is you've got the psychopaths who are knowingly doing this, those that run Amazon and these other platforms I'm talking about. But then you've got other people who are not directly connected to the cult. Lawyers, a lot of them are the big ones, but a lot of them aren't. And you've got other platforms that could host Parler, who are not as big as the giants, but could still host them.
Yeah.
And they pull out because representatives of the cult in all their forms say to them, you work with Parler and we'll destroy you. Mm-hmm. And so they go, and they pull out. Yeah. The number of venues over the years, because people say all this censorship. I've been experiencing censorship 30 bloody years. I'm well aware of how it works. I was dealing with censorship before anyone bloody heard of it. But so what would you would have is you book a venue to do a talk, an evening talk, an all day talk, whatever. Maybe a hotel, it may be a theater or whatever, and they'd take the booking, and they would have a problem, and then they'd get a call from the usual suspects who would say, "This guy's all these things, all of them lies, but don't matter." And people are always asking the question, not only what's in it for me, but how is this going to affect me? So the venue listens to this, and most of them at this point pull out. If they don't, and they say, "No, we're not having it," freedom of speech, they then start getting contacted by people who say, "We're going to destroy your theater. We're going to destroy your hotel. Yeah. You will absolutely destroy it. You won't get any business if you have this guy on." And most of them at that point, like the lawyers, etc., with Parler, will then pull out. And I know this to be true because it's happened to me so many times. So this is how it works. So we're just seeing a global version of it now.
Yeah, I just wanted to change the subject slightly, but it's still on the same subject. The distortion is I had a bit of synchronicity occur recently, and I've actually been reading your book, Human Race, Get Off Your Knees. And what came to this as well was I was watching some of Graham Hancock's work, and in terms of synchronizing in terms of history, and how certain pieces of history, how they've been not misrepresented, but not looked into properly, and the distortion of history, which I believe is all part. When you mentioned, David, this stuff hasn't been going on for a year or 2 years. It's been going on a very, very long time. Now, I don't know if how you feel about Graham Hancock's work or in terms of that, but when we're talking about the times when we had this technology before, when we've been advanced before, and I don't know what your thoughts on that, what your comments would be.
Well, I've written a stream of books going back to 1991, and they're multifaceted in their information. All right, they're about the same theme, but they are very different in the various areas that they research and reveal. And okay, at the moment, I'm concentrating obviously on current events because they need to be focused upon. Yeah. But over the years, from the 1990s onwards, I've done a tremendous amount of research into where this all came from, and the fact that history has been completely distorted.
Yeah.
But I'll give you a simple example of the reason they want to rewrite history. Because by doing that, they change and distort your perception of the present. So, simple example. If you, and this has happened more and more, you change the way that history is taught. Very important subject, but of course it's a diminishing subject in the education system. So if you distort history and you leave out the fact that what we call socialism, in other words, the Stalinism that's called socialism, and the Chinese Communist Party that's called socialism, and Pol Pot that was called socialism, have been responsible for at least 100 million deaths over the last 100 years or so. Then you will have people, young people, as they are today, not least in America, saying we have to replace capitalism with socialism, because, and they'll say it almost as if it's a new idea, and they'll talk about Marxism, when, as I've shown in my books, Karl Marx was the banker's boy. He wasn't the man of the people. He was a banker's boy. He was put up there to articulate a form of central control, controlled by the few of the many, called Marxism. But there's no difference, except in a detail, between Marxism and fascism. They're both the same very few dictating to the very many and imposing their will through violence and all the things that go with tyranny. So I don't know whether you call it communism. Oh well, no. Stalin was a communist, and Hitler was a fascist. Okay, so tell me what the difference was in Germany and Russia for the people. It's
absolutely, yeah.
So if you can rewrite history and not teach the historic facts about what communism does, what called socialism does, then you look at communism in Russia, it was the few dictating to the many through the governmental communist structure of the country. Same in China now.
Yeah,
fascism, tiny few dictating through corporations and the government to the very many. It's the same thing. But what you have now in America, for instance, because of the total confusion about history and the way it's been taught, is these people who want socialism, i.e. Marxism, are saying that they're anti-fascist, right? But fascism is just another form of Marxism.
Yeah.
In terms of its impact on the people. So manipulating history manipulates your perception of the present. And one of the things that has been manipulated is the idea that human development, if you like, has only ever gone forward. And it's gone like that. So we now are at the cutting edge of human potential at this point. We are at the furthest forefront of human potential in human history. Well, what I would say is, have a look at the world of ancient Egypt and what was done, what was built, and then go and have a look at Cairo today, right? And tell me that societies only go forward. They don't. Yeah. Because what is a society based on? What is it based on in terms of where it is, wherever it is? Knowledge.
Yeah.
Now, if you develop a knowledge that allows you the potential to do certain things, which we would call advanced, well, your society will be advanced if that knowledge is allowed to express itself. But if something comes along like fantastic cataclysms that basically wipe out that society globally, and in doing so, wipe out that knowledge, then your society is going to go from the height of knowledge, potential, its state of being, and it's going to fly. So what today would happen in this cutting edge society if we didn't have access to oil and we didn't have access even more to electricity? Would be over. We'd be absolutely flying back into a highly deprived, every person for themselves society of anything but an advanced society. And very quickly, with the loss of that electricity and the loss of that communicative power, the world on which that electricity, or which that world was founded, electricity, high technology, based on electricity and all that, very quickly that would start to fade. As the generations started moving and the people that directly experienced the cataclysm, those that survived, that ended that society, as they died and other generations followed them, other generations are being born into a very, very different society. And slowly but surely, probably more than very much quicker than slowly, memories of that high tech society would be disappearing. They would now be myths and legends, and then eventually they would be dismissed. And it's very clear. And I started on this research way back, very early in the 1990s. Very clearly, there was a massive cataclysmic event that affected the Earth, but wasn't only of the Earth, that it affected other planetary bodies, in which the folklore legends remember it as the war of the gods in the heavens. And it must have been, only about 1993, when I was researching this, I read a book called, you probably can't get it anymore, I've got a copy here somewhere, called When the Earth Nearly Died, or The Day the Earth Nearly Died. And it was two researchers, and what they did was look at all the ancient legends around the world of a cataclysm being described. I mean, just not an earthquake. I mean, all beyond human comprehension today, where whole mountain ranges were forming, where the world was being redrawn, where a lot of the legends of the Great Flood come from this. There was a tsunami, a tidal wave, when it seems the Earth actually moved. And you move the Earth, when most of it's sea, water, what's going to happen? So what they did is they looked at all these legends that were describing this very compelling common themes. And then they looked at the biological and geological record of the Earth to see if they matched the legends, and they did. Just compellingly, that what was being described can be seen in the biological and geological record. And it brought an end, it would seem, to in whatever way you want to describe it, an advanced society. And one of the names that's passed through history and the legends and the myths of that time is the Golden Age.
Yeah.
And you know, this is the thing about, if you research with an open mind, you realize the scale of deceit is stunning. It's almost total and all-encompassing, the deceit, not least of history. And I've got a book up here. It's very, very expensive now to buy because it's out of print. You go on the internet to get a copy. It's through the bloody roof. It should be back in print. It's a great book. It's called The Saturn Myth. And so this researcher, David Tolbert, he's an American, an excellent researcher into these things. He not as well known as Hancock, but Tolbert is brilliant at what he does.
Yeah.
And what he did is he looked at legends and myths all over the world in all the different cultures about Saturn. And you know, the book's called The Saturn Myth because he was looking at all the myths about Saturn. And what he found is the common themes were fantastic, and also started to realize what so many of these different symbols, which actually, when you break them down, are the same symbols that appear in the different cultures, symbolizing things that, you know, well, what's that a symbol of? He realized that they were actually symbolizing Saturn. And that if you look at ancient Rome, which was a big conduit for this cult moving through history, the Roman Empire, their major god was Saturn. And indeed, our Christmas is just a reformed version of the Roman festival of Saturnalia. At Saturnalia, which was in the run-up to the winter solstice and what is our Christmas, they used to have decorated trees, they used to exchange gifts, they had holly and all this stuff. And our Christmas is actually a modern version of Saturnalia. And, you know, I've been to Rome many times, and there in among the ruins is the ruins of the Temple of Saturn. So, and Saturn, you know, the ancient Greek of Kronos was the personification god of Saturn. And Saturn in astrology rules time. And if you look at the way the ancient Greeks described Kronos and portrayed Kronos, he is what we call today Old Father Time. And Old Father Time is the long beard. This is Kronos. The Old Father Time, Saturn, rules time. And Old Father Time holds a scythe. And that relates to the agricultural relationship that was said to be of Saturn, who was the god of agriculture. But the question is this, you see, when you look at Saturn where it is now, why would it be such a focus of the ancient world, of the far ancient world? There's no reason for it. Why would it be? You know, it's a light in the sky. And without telescopes, you know, it might even be less than that.
Yeah.
Much of the year. So why? But then you look at Tolbert's research and what he's describing and what these legends and myths are describing about Saturn. And that is that Saturn, at one point in the Golden Age, was actually a second son of the Earth. And they describe Saturn as being the focus light, if you like, not the sun that we have today, but the real focus light in relation to the sun, to the Earth, was Saturn. And there's no mention, and I go into this in the books, but there's no mention in any of these myths that Saturn had rings. And when you then go through all the symbols, you realize why and the legends, you realize why there is this such massive focus on Saturn in the ancient world, where there never would be if it was where it is now. And when you and if you go on the internet and you or YouTube and you put David Talbot in and the day the earth changed, or words to the effect of a cataclysm in the heavens, you'll see a brilliant film, an animated film of what he says these myths say about what happened to Saturn. Because what's described is this war of the gods in the heavens. Something happened that caused massive cataclysms and a number of planets to move locations. It affected Mars massively. There were massive interactions with Mars, electromagnetic interactions, which were absolutely massively involved in these cataclysms on Earth that are described in the ancient myths. Venus went walkabout. Jupiter was affected, and Saturn was massively affected, and completely changed its location. And that was and this is not millions of years ago. This is far enough back to still be remembered in the native histories and the almost genetic memory of sections of the population. It's been passed through in various myths. And so that did for the Golden Age society. And I've just described basically the process when I talked about what would happen to us today if electricity suddenly disappeared.
Yeah.
The people, those that survived, and there weren't enormous numbers, when they started to go from the direct memory of it, and generations followed, the memory of it was passed over in myths and legends, yes, but it was fading and fading and fading. And if you pick up traditional history, the history of the official stories, they talk about Sumer, which became Babylon, now is that area between the Euphrates and the Tigris rivers. A real focus in the ancient world, that area was. Then they talk about Sumer being the cradle of civilization. You will have heard of that. Sumer was the cradle of civilization. No. Sumer was when humanity reached a certain level of awareness, knowledge in the aftermath of the cataclysm that took it away. So it wasn't the cradle of civilization. It was the re-emergence of what they call civilization.
Absolutely.
A long period of recovering from this phenomenal cataclysm. And then you pick up the other legends of Atlantis and Lemuria or Mu, which were massive land masses which disappeared under the ocean. And, then you come to the work of people like Hancock and all the fantastic pyramids and temples and buildings clearly built by an advanced culture that are found deep under the ocean. And there's famous ones around the Caribbean, for instance. But these are remnants of that civilization that went before. And just think about this one. Another thing that I've written about in my research over the years is that when this cataclysm happened, there was a dramatic shift in human consciousness, and not a shift upwards either. And so let's just look at this and then relate it to that. What is astrology? Astrology is the science of the interaction of information fields. That's actually what it is. So we are an information field. Part of our makeup is an electromagnetic information field. In fact, the body is a holographic expression of that information field. And we live within a sea of energy, which is actually a sea of information, vibration, frequency.
Yeah.
And we're interacting with that all the time. And how do you affect all this fish at the same time? You affect the sea. You don't have to affect every fish. To affect every fish, you affect the ocean that they're swimming in, and then every fish is affected. And anything that affects this ocean of energy that we are part of and interacting with, it's like an interaction with Wi-Fi, where our vibrations, thoughts, emotions, awareness is communicated into the field, which affects the field, and the state of the field affects us. Now, this cult knows this. This is why it's constantly trying to hold down the vibration of this field, because then it affects us and holds us in.
Absolutely.
Unless we make the decision to go beyond that and expand our own consciousness, and then we can go beyond the influence of that. But most people are caught in it because they don't know there's anything to be caught in because of suppression of knowledge about how all this works. So let's come back to astrology. Although astronomy and astrology in the ancient world were basically two sides of the same thing.
Yeah.
Now they've been pulled apart. Oh, this is astronomy. Oh, yes, I'm an intellectual. I know about astronomy. Oh, you, astrology, you're a nutter, right? You know. But actually, in the ancient world, they were treated as one science. Anyway,
yeah.
What happens is that we are an information field, and every planet and every star, and I would strongly suggest that Jupiter and Saturn are actually a form of star, especially Saturn in its earlier incarnation, big time. This is why both planets still give off more energy than they receive from the sun. Anyway, their very existence, wherever they are, is impacting upon the field because of the energy, the information field, the consciousness that they are expressing.
Mm.
Yeah.
But as these planets move into these different alignments, conjunctions, trines, etc., the sum total of their impact on the field is greater than their individual parts. Let me just get rid of this. So this is why certain conjunctions, like we just had this Saturn-Jupiter alignment on the 21st of December, are considered so important.
Yeah.
Anyway, so as they move around and they go through these different combinations, they're impacting on the field. And through that, they are impacting on us. And, you know, I won't go into it now, but you can break it down to the impact of when you are born, or some say conceived, on the field, and the effect of the field at that time, which is impacted by where the planets are at that time. And so as you go through your life, your field is going to interact with the movement of the planets during your lifetime in a different way to someone born at a different time, different point in the cycle. Anyway, we go back and you think about this impact that the planetary bodies have on the field, thus on us, and our consciousness, our awareness, all of it. And then you go back to what is described, not just by people like David Tolbert, but by Immanuel Velikovsky back in the 50s, who was ridiculed for talking about this very cataclysmic situation. And so much of what he said in the 50s, is, despite all the ridicule and the attempts to stop the circulation of his books, nothing changed.
Yeah, that seems the pattern, David. It's been going on a long time, this ridicule of people.
Yeah, but this is the point. If the system wants to stop you hearing it, it must be something you need to see.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
They try to censor you, whether it's Velikovsky or me or anybody, the more it gives credibility to the information that they are communicating. But So you had a certain planetary situation. The planets, stars, whatever you want to call them, were in a certain situation within the solar system. And by being in that situation, they were impacting on the field, which was impacting on humans. That was the situation. That was the norm, the way things were. But when this cataclysm happened, it was all rearranged. So planets went into new locations. And as they went into new locations, sometimes like Saturn, seriously new locations, they started to impact on the field in a very, very different way. Of course they would, because, you know, if you've got like electrons going around a nucleus in an atom, and suddenly they change where they are and what they're giving off, the atom's going to change. The energy of the atom is going to change. It has to. So it starts to make sense that in the aftermath of what I'm describing, what Tolbert's describing, what Velikovsky was describing, that there would be this shift in consciousness, this change in consciousness. So people actually thought differently, saw things differently, were much more five sense orientated than they were before. In the Golden Age, where there's much more expansion of consciousness. And I talk about in the books of how there was a force behind all this that wanted that consciousness to change, and that's the force in the unseen, which is actually behind this cult.
Yeah.
And this cult, when you track and research its major players, and a lot of it's not major players, you inevitably lead into pedophilia and you lead into Satanism. And they take part in these satanic rituals to the gods. And they are the same gods that the ancients used to sacrifice people to. So it makes sense that, you know, I've uncovered over the years, as of other people, how these human sacrifice rituals are still going on, not least of children, perpetrated by this very cult. And so these people may be sick and they may be deeply disturbed, but on an intellectual level, they're not stupid. And they would be doing rituals to gods unless whatever that form those gods take, those gods existed. And so that's what they're worshipping in their satanic rituals. Not talking about, you know, the smaller ones where they're playing at it. I'm talking about the big rituals of the major players. They are actually interacting in these rituals with this force that ultimately is behind all this. And this force is the common theme through human history since the cataclysm that has led us to where we are now. And I tell you, when you read my books and you see this background, and then you see where we're being taken now and why, the two make perfect sense.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to ask it. And it's something that, because I believe on our journeys that sometimes things are put in our path, information for us to go to, or sometimes it's just placed within us and, you know, it's subconsciously. But I believe those two, what you've explained, I really appreciate the answer you've given, that it links it all together. It is part of what's going on now. And I truly believe what we're going through, that we do have an opportunity, if we're willing, to go into another golden age. We can take it that way if we wish to.
Yeah, I mean, they're not trying to hold the population in a low vibrational state of isolation, consciousness isolation in the five senses, but because it's a bit of fun. It's because they have to do it. They can only control an ignorant population. And the whole system is set up from cradle to grave to keep people in that ignorance. You know, I'm not condemning people and saying you're ignorant, you are. By ignorance, I mean lack of knowledge. And the whole system is set up to hold humanity in that state of lack of knowledge that is called ignorance.
Yeah.
Because we live in I mentioned this last time we spoke, but we live in a world that's actually two worlds. There's the world of the population, And that has a certain level of knowledge that is fiercely limited. And then you have this other world, which is this global network of secret societies and semi-secret groups that I call the cult, that passes through the generations. This is why secret societies are secret. Information, knowledge that it doesn't want the population to know.
Yeah.
Obviously, part of that knowledge is where the world's being taken. You know, I couldn't be so accurate in predicting current events if current events were random. Nor could George Orwell, nor could Aldous Huxley with Brave New World.
Absolutely. His name's been mentioned a lot lately, George Orwell. Absolutely.
Yeah. And Aldous Huxley, who got the old genetic drug side of the manipulation back in 1932. And both had access to this other world. I'm not saying Orwell was part of the other world. He was uncovering the other world, like I have been, because what we're doing is going to this other world, not going in it, but researching it, uncovering what's going on there as much as we can. Yeah. And we're taking that information and putting it in the world of the population. This is what's going on. And because the population has been kept in such a limited state of knowledge by this systematic cult manipulation, when the truth of what actually this world is doing and how it's doing it is given to much of the population, they just laugh at you, call you a tinfoil hat and a nutter. You just have to live with that, because the dynamic of the two worlds, you're gonna face that. But more and more people, not least since the turn of 2020, are now starting to open their minds also to see the world in a different way. So part of this knowledge that's kept from us is obviously where the world's being taken, because they want us to believe that events are random and have no connection. Because if you see the connections, that's why I call my books dot connecting books. Then you don't see random dots. You see pictures once you know how they connect. But the other side of this knowledge that's systematically kept from the population, fundamental, without which the other stuff could work, is knowledge of the nature of reality and the true nature of the I, which is not the body, it's the consciousness experiencing through the body. And that consciousness can be the size of a pea, or it can be infinite in nature. And that's not, I'm infinite in nature, you've got consciousness the size of a pea, so I'm better than you. No, it's a choice. Yeah. Because, we talk about consciousness, and I am this consciousness, and you're that consciousness, and you're that consciousness. Well, yeah, because you're an individual point of attention at this point, perceiving through the body, which focuses attention in a certain very narrow band of frequencies we call the world. That is the band of frequency of this world. The visual world that we see is so narrow, it's almost laughable. I don't think that's an accident either. Anyway, but actually, every individual, whatever your point of consciousness or point of attention, we are also all other consciousness. We are the whole as we are the focused attention. The two are the same. This is why racism is so ludicrous, because we're all the same consciousness having different experiences. Yeah. And the vehicle is what we call racism, but they're just vehicles to experience. And if you notice, because it all connects, this identity politics is about subdividing what I call phantom self, because there's the infinite self, consciousness, and then there's the label self, what I call phantom self. This is believing the I is, I'm a man, I'm a woman, I'm this race, I'm that religion, I'm this sexuality, and so on. No, that's what you're experiencing. It's not what you are, the true I. The true I is consciousness, ultimately all consciousness.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when you want to control people, you don't want them to know that they are all that is, has been, and ever can be, having a brief experience called human. You don't want them to know that.
No.
You want them to self-identify with limitations. So you want them to self-identify with the labels and the life story and all this stuff. And so we've had men and we've had women and we've had, different labels. But what they have done with identity politics is all part of this manipulation, is to subdivide the original labels. So this row of letters is getting longer and longer and longer as people like LBGT, blah, 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 as people self-identify in more and more and more minutiae of self-identity. So you're not all that is, has been, ever can be having an experience. You are that experience. And not only that, you are that subdivision of that experience. So people's sense of self, just who buy that, it gets smaller and smaller and more myopic. And that's what the cult wants. It wants people in that state. But anytime we choose, we can self-identify with being the consciousness having the experience, and everything changes. Everything changes because when you expand your awareness, and it's not, I'm Buddha sitting cross-legged on a mountain. Anyone can do it. It's a choice.
Yeah.
But what are you doing if you're expanding your consciousness? You're expanding your awareness. You're expanding your point of attention further and further and further into the infinite field of consciousness, of which everyone is ultimately not only a part, but they are. So as you do that, you start to play the long game and not the short game. The short game is, I am my labels, and I've got the biblical 70 and then I'm out of here. And either I'm going to be judged by some God, because some guy in a frock's told me I will be, or I'm just going to disappear into nothingness because there is no afterlife, right? So that's basically the choice. And so you're going to play the short game, and you're going to look at this life in a completely different way to someone who is aware of their true nature and plays the long game. What I mean by short and long game is this. If you have an experience like being intimidated by the police over lockdown, or being forced to do this or do that, and you're frightened of standing up, well, you'll be frightened of standing up because you're playing the short game. And to you, this is a short life, and you don't want to face the consequences of actually doing what you know to be right, which is to stand up to this crap. But when you're playing the long game, not only the moment, the experience in the moment, but the whole human life experience from cradle to grave, for the body, not you, is just a infinitesimal smear in the exploration of forever. So that state of long game consciousness does not see standing up to authority as a experience as intimidating, because it's just a brief infinitesimal experience in the journey through forever. And even the human life itself is a smear within forever in terms of what we call time. And what you realize is that whatever you're experiencing is just an experience in that moment. And there'll be another one along eventually, and then another one, and then another one, and then another one. And eventually you leave the body and you expand back into a greater awareness of self. So, it's a completely different way of looking at the world and looking at life. And you will do things, you will stand up for things, because expanded levels of consciousness do what they know to be right. They don't think, well, how will this affect me? Or what are the consequences for me? Yeah. They don't look into traps and just do kamikaze things for the sake of it. But when it comes down to it, they will do what they know to be right. And the consequences will have to take care of themselves, because if I'm going to not do what I know to be right, because I fear the consequences of doing that, then I'm not in any expanded state of consciousness, because consciousness in that state does not do that.
Yeah.
And so instead of acquiescing to authority, wearing masks to tell you, and all this other stuff, closing your business down because they tell you, you won't do it. You won't obey authority when you know that authority is simply imposing a will on you to destroy you and to enslave you. You won't do it. This won't let you do it. But if you're in that state of consciousness, then such things can be incredibly intimidating and incredibly frightening. And that's why they want to hold us in that state. And this manipulation and psychological manipulation we started talking about at the start is all part of this process of breaking down the psyche and the perception and the sense of self, so that you can become more and more and more a prisoner of the five senses, and get further and further away from being influenced by the true self, the true I, which is the consciousness that's behind the experience.
Very, very much so. That's the way I feel as well. That's the way I see things at the moment. And as well as when we open that way, it wipes away the fear. There is no fear.
It becomes effortless, doesn't it? Life becomes effortless because you're trusting in the knowing, rather than this false belief system that we've indoctrinated with when we were born. We have this intuitiveness. We are guided, effortless, and it is a beautiful experience when you go through that.
I mean, there's I'm about a quarter of the way through this book, your book, David, and one of the quotes in it about being on a river, and if you imagine your life like a river, and your mind will take you to the next bend in that river, but your consciousness will take you to where the river leads. And I thought that was such a fantastic analogy. I know it's not word for word, but for me, that's so true. You start to recognize experiences totally different, not saying, oh my God, why has this happened to me? Why is this happening for me?
Yeah.
Where does it lead?
Yeah, what you're describing is the five sense mind symbolically can see the next turn on the river.
Yeah.
But expanded states of consciousness, just another level of the same I, can see the river from source to sea. So an individual experience, I've used this analogy before in terms of the river. You are canoeing down the river, and you've set your mind on getting to a certain place in the river by nightfall. And as you're paddling down the river, which you've never been down before, you spring a leak in the canoe, and you get yourself to the bank, and you're bloody furious because you're not going to get what your mind has set its mind on, which is that location on the river that night. And you're sitting there spitting blood and feeling sorry for yourself, and someone comes along and says, hey mate, you were so bloody lucky. There's a freaking massive waterfall behind that bend, around that bend.
Yeah.
If you'd have kept going, mate, it was over.
Yeah,
exactly.
And I know from my own life experience, as I've said in the books, life gives you your greatest gifts, brilliantly disguised as your worst nightmares.
Yeah.
And some of the most challenging parts of my life have given me the most. But because it is a river from source to sea, it's not just the individual experience in the moment. That's just the individual experience in the moment. And it's a completely different way of looking at life. And so another part of this, from a consciousness point of view, one of the great prisons that people live in, along with the fear of what other people think, massive prison, is fear of death. Fear of death is colossal, because fear of death is what gets people to give their power away to doctors that don't even know how the body works. Because if you are in 70 years and 10 perceptual mode, then death is a big fearful thing to people, because, well, what the hell happens? Because that's the other thing, that this world wants to keep the nature of reality from this world, because by keeping it away from this world, you instill fear of death in this world, fear of being judged by some angry God, or fear of just non-existence. Of course, we do that every night. We go to sleep. Anyway, I think I can handle that myself. Anyway, you're looking at with fear of death is you give your power away to anything you think and anyone you think can stop you reaching the end of your life, because you fear that moment, what's going to happen, right? And so you look at why people went under house arrest meekly last spring, still now, but fewer, in thinking it, it's a danger to them, but still a lot that do. But going back last spring, vast numbers of people bought the idea there was a deadly virus. And what made them go under house arrest? Fear of death. That was a major factor in getting people to do that. So if I have to go under house arrest and do what this brain dead, psychopathically controlled authority tells me, then I will, if I think it will save me from what I fear, which is death. But when you lose the fear of death, because there is no death, it's just a transition of your awareness from the focus of attention through the body that holds us in these frequencies that we call the world, to be released from that limitation and into an expanded state of consciousness and other realities, then the fear of death disappears. And so when you don't fear death, that frees you from many things that would otherwise limit you. It frees you from taking chances. It frees you from meekly going under house arrest because you fear some deadly virus. It's a massive freedom to lose the fear of death, and that's why they want to instill it as much as possible. That's what they're manipulating.
Absolutely.
They're manipulating the fear of death. In the back of the brain here is called the reptilian brain. It's also called the R complex. And the reptilian brain is where we get things like road rage from, and fight or flight reaction to danger. And because the reptilian brain is constantly scanning the environment for threats to survival, not just survival, death survival, but survival of a relationship, survival of a job, survival of anything. And it's constantly scanning the environment for these dangers. So it's constantly like in an emotional state of I'm in danger. And that's what's triggered when they manipulate that response via telling you you're in danger. Whether it's you might be in danger of a terrorist attack, you might be in danger of this virus, you might be in danger of this, you might be in danger of that. They're triggering this, and this doesn't think; it reacts. And this is when people will react in a really over-the-top way, and then they'll move to the thinking levels and they'll say, what the hell was I doing? Saying that, doing that. What was I thinking? Well, you weren't thinking, because the unthinking reptilian brain response was kicking in. And they're manipulating that reptilian brain all the time to keep us in a constant state of fearing not surviving in all these areas of not surviving. And of course, one of the ones now that is very, very understandably prominent is fear of surviving economically.
Yeah.
So this is all this triggering of the reptilian survival response is all part of what's going on now, because these people, they know what to do. So when you go into a shop without a mask and someone has a go at you for it, that's their reptilian brain seeing you not wearing a mask as a threat to their survival. Yeah. The reptilian brain. That's why they go over the top and do crazy things.
And I think that key word there is trigger as well.
Yeah.
It's absolutely. I know we're coming up to time here. Have you got a question you'd like to ask, Stephen? I've realised Bobby, who's commented a few times, there's a question there. If you'd like to pose that.
Yeah, I will. There's a few comments. There's a particular question that they would like to ask, and it's really two parts. It's one of them about apparently all these deaths in hospitals. This narrative that they're saying these. I don't know. I don't watch the news. You see, that's one thing that I've been.
I don't.
It's a narrative that I think is absolutely rubbish. It's trying to instill fear. So what's happening in the hospitals and with this vaccine? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, look at this time, and someone did this. They did it with a series of Guardian articles going back through the winters from now to 2020, 2019, 2018, 2017. And at this time, every year, they said these articles appeared that the NHS was being overrun. Because in the winter, lots of people get ill, not least by flu, which has disappeared worldwide, flu, because it's been redesignated COVID-19. And yet, when you look at bed occupancy numbers, actually, there are fewer beds occupied in this period than there were in the same period last year. So, and 2019. So, what happens is, and one other thing that's been happening, and this has been very prevalent, is the number of beds, not least emergency beds, have been reduced over the years. So you're not even dealing with like in terms of capacity. And so there's nothing going on in terms of numbers that is not happening normally this time every year. You know, some figures came out about 2 weeks ago in America about deaths from all causes in 2020 compared with 2019. And they were about the same.
Yeah.
But where the hell is this deadly virus? See, if you've got a deadly virus, it doesn't mean people stop dying of other things. They go on. The deadly virus is as well as, not instead of. So why is it, and these figures show this, there was a lady called Genevieve Briand. She's works at the Johns Hopkins operation in America, University Medical Operation in America. And she came out with these figures, and she was castigated for them. And then the official figures came out weeks later and confirmed that she was right. And what she found was that not only have deaths from all causes in America, this year, 2020, etc., compared with last year, and the year before, not any different. But as COVID-19 death figures have gone up, deaths from other causes have gone down at the same rate. So deaths from heart disease, deaths from all these different things, deaths from flu, they've gone down. How is that possible? Only by redesignation of those causes of death to giving them a new cause of death, which is not the real cause of death.
Why do they want to do that then, David? Why do you think they want to do that?
Well, because they want you terrified of a new deadly virus, which has never been isolated, never been shown to exist, and is tested for by a test that's not testing for it. and if you are terrified enough, you will have the vaccine, or the fake vaccine, which is not really a vaccine, and that's the punchline. You see, people. I've been saying since March there is no bloody virus, and then people say, "Oh no, there's a virus." Oh, there's people in the alternative media have gone, "Oh no, there's a bioweapon. It's a bioweapon." Well, I don't say the bioweapon's not the virus. The bioweapon's the bloody vaccine, or what they claim is a vaccine. That's the bioweapon. And the fake virus is to get the bioweapon inside you through the fake vaccine. But if you look at just look at the figures. the chances of going from alleged infection, test positive with a test not testing with a virus, going from infection to death with the alleged COVID-19, the figures are tiny. With beyond or below the absolutely elderly or are dying all the time of other things, it's like 99.9 something percent will not die, go from infection to fatality. So the number of people, even by their manipulated figures, dying compared with those allegedly infected is tiny. Now, it's accepted, not near enough, but it's accepted that vast numbers of people who are said to have died of COVID-19, because they put it on the death certificate, didn't die of COVID-19 at all. You notice how they say often they'll say so and so died with COVID-19, not of it.
Yeah, COVID related.
Right? Yeah, COVID related. What that means is it's not COVID related. It means that they died of something else, but they tested positive with a test not testing for the virus. So that goes on the death certificate, because now within 28 days of a positive test, COVID-19 goes on the death certificate, and in other ways of counting the figures, it can be as much as 60 days. So now, take away all those death certificates that say COVID-19 when it was nothing to do with the death of the person, and now take them away from that tiny number said to die, but tiny point something percentage who are said to die having gone from infection to death. Take the fake death certificates away from that number, and what are you left with? Nothing. Which is why the figures in America are about the same. And where the figures have gone up, well, why wouldn't they? From that point of view, the non-COVID figures, although of course so much of this is said to be COVID, but of course lockdown is killing lots and lots of people. Lots of people who are not getting diagnosis, they're not getting treatment.
It's also suicide rates, David, which you never mentioned on the mainstream media, that are going through the roof. Absolutely.
Yeah. And a lot of that reporting of suicides going through the roof is coming from people's personal experience, like medical staff, etc., and mental health staff, etc. That's where it's coming from, because trying to get the official figures of suicides to compare them with other years is a hell of a challenge, because they don't want people to know.
Yeah.
But people's personal experience in dealing with suicide is constant. It's going through the roof. But they don't want the real truth of that to come out, because it will dilute their reasons for lockdown and their justification of lockdown. And again, we come back to the psychology. Everything is geared to getting the population to see the situation in a certain way, by emphasizing some information and censoring others. They've changed the figures and the reporting of the figures. Do you know they've started to suppress the figures of occupancy in ICUs and stuff like that. All these figures that would give you a real grasp on actually the government's not telling the truth. They're all being suppressed, because they're defending a lie, and you can only defend a lie by deleting the truth.
You also had the lady in, I believe it was Gloucestershire, who went in the hospital and filmed empty beds, empty wards, and soon after she was visited by the police. and arrested for going in a hospital and just filming. You know, you'd think with all this going on, what's the problem? You'd think that would be the least of anyone's problems.
Yeah, and what started to happen, and it happened a lot in the spring, of course. The people started going into hospitals this time around and just filming empty hospitals. Certainly in the areas they went to, was absolutely no one. Now that's a real problem, because the narrative is that they're overrun, overrun. And so you have to intimidate people into no longer doing that.
Yeah.
So that's why the police turn up and start coming the intimidation tactics, because what they're doing it to that woman, but what they're really saying is to anyone else who's thinking of doing it, this is what happens. So I wouldn't do it if I were you. It's all intimidation. And you know what? You notice what happened immediately afterwards? The BBC was given exclusive access to a emergency wards for this for various films and stuff. It's all about the narrative, because the BBC, of course, is a government department. I worked there for many years, back in the 80s. I left in 1990, and it was not a bastion of truth then, in terms of there were limits on where journalists could go, but it was dreamland compared with now. And I was there when there was a director general called Alistair Milne, and he was the last director general that was committed, as best he could with all the pressures on him, to the BBC being fair, impartial, and seeking the truth. So Margaret Thatcher got rid of him because of that. And ever since, the director generals have just been pawns of the system. BBC has just been absorbed by the government, and it's now a government department. And a point I would make on this, I've got this wire come out, and I better not continue without putting it back in, or this computer might go zip and disappear. So we'll get that. Anyway, so the BBC has become this propaganda operation, but not a propaganda operation for a particular party. No, because the BBC will say, "Oh, the left say that we're biased against them, and the right say we're biased against them." No, its bias is towards the agenda of the cult. That's its bias. So if a government, Conservative or Labour, is pursuing the agenda of the cult, like this one is currently with Johnson, it will be its propaganda arm, the BBC. But in other areas where it's not, a government is not going with the cult agenda in various little areas, like Brexit, the BBC will oppose the government and do everything it can to undermine it. But then the same government pursues the cult agenda with this COVID crap, and the government then the BBC then starts to be the propaganda arm of that. So it doesn't matter, what the party is; it's what the party is pursuing in power, deciding whether the BBC will try to undermine it, like it did with Brexit, quite blatantly, or whether it will promote it as it is now.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, just want to thank you again, David, for joining us. And there's a lot of opinions coming up on our comments. And what we're doing is we are presenting this information with everyone, and so that you're able to go away and form your truth. Look into this stuff, sit with it, and find your truth. And this is why it's important. Something Brian Rose said, David, about one of your interviews, which I feel hit the nail on the head, which he said, "I don't agree with everything David says, but I will defend his right to say it." And this is what's important. Everybody, this free speech should be around us so we can get this information out there. And if something's not right, it will be proven not to be right. As we walk forward, we don't need people to say, well, just don't listen to that because it's a load of crap. It's it's being open-minded and having these conversations, which is, I know it's the passion of myself and Stephen to do this and to keep this free speech going, speaking with people like yourselves and getting it out there. So I'd like to thank you for being part of that today. But
no problem. I would just say that I have no problem with people questioning what I say and having the right to a different opinion, because I'm confident that what I say has a validity. Indeed, geez, I mean, look what's happening now compared with what was in my book saying this is coming. But if you're not confident that what you're saying has validity, in fact, you know it doesn't have validity because it's a scam, that's when you want to censor other people, because you can't face the debate because you know you can't win it. And in terms of what you've just said, people researching for themselves, how can people have self-respect and not do that?
Yeah,
because this is what's important.
It's all about self-respect. Where's the self-respect in being told what to do by an authority, like all authorities, with a long history of lying? It's their job. And just accepting it without a second thought, and then attacking those who do have the self-respect to question it, see if it stands up to scrutiny. Where's the self-respect in that? There is none.
Absolutely, and that's what's important, to question and to find your own truths, which is something we feel very passionate about here. And yeah, we hope everybody's able to do that. And just been a really good talk today, David. We'd just like to thank you again for your time you've given us, and we could do this for hours. I certainly could. There's so much we could touch upon. I know we were talking about history, and I know we could talk for hours on end. Yeah. But I just find we're just, as we said, getting that information out there, and I just want to wish you well with everything you're doing, and look forward to speaking to you again in the future. As we say at the Purple Mountain, we always say, fight the good fight with love and light.
Yeah. Or cease to cooperate with those that are fighting against you.
Absolutely.
I don't want to fight them. I just don't want to cooperate with them.
Yeah. No, me too.
My cooperation. They can't do anything.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, so thanks so much, David, and thank you for everybody for joining us. Until we speak again, thanks very much. Take care.
Thank you, David. Bye. God bless. Bye. Bye.